Hello, Namaste, Salam, Sat Sri Akal, Adab, Kem Cho. Welcome, audience, to this episode by Sarvin Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about practical approaches to public speaking. And to talk about it, we have a very brilliant guest with us, Mr. Rupinder Singh. A brief background about him is that he has over 2 decades of experience in professional training, particularly in the learning and development area. Also, he is a distinguished Toastmaster, which is the highest qualification available in Toastmasters International. To top it all off, he is also second in the World Championship of Public Speaking semi-final in 2018. Knowing him personally, I would say Rupinder personality can be summarized in three H. He is honest, he is humorous, and most of all, he is very humble. Welcome, Rupinder, to the episode. How are you doing?
I humbly thank you.
That's good. That's good. So we'll start off right into the session. And the first question I have, Rupinder, for you is there is a lot of talk about stage fright. You don't know how you'll handle the audience. You don't know how the mic would work, how it won't work. So why don't we start with before going on the stage, what could be a few things that would help us calm ourselves down, even though there can be some nervousness, and how we can actually be in the right set of mindset when we are going on the stage.
Thank you, Sayam. I get asked this question a lot that how do we overcome stage fright and what do you do before you go on stage? My short answer, I actually eat food. Uh,
Oh,
I know that is not the answer that you were looking for, but on a more serious note, when you are in a zone like that, I would like to call it the zone. When you're in
mhm.
a zone like that, it becomes immaterial as to how you're doing, whether you're doing it right or not. Because even if you're doing it wrong, you will course correct it in such a manner that people will barely notice where that you went wrong. And even if they do notice, they will actually appreciate the way you got it right. Get into that zone. Now, how do you get
Yeah.
into that zone?
Mhm.
There are many ways. The essential thing is that you want to be comfortable with yourself. And in
Mhm.
order to be comfortable with yourself, you want to do the thing that makes you most comfortable. Me, I try food, number one.
Mhm.
I have my own set of playlists, and you want to go onto the stage with a relaxed mindset where
Mhm.
you are there, the stage is there, the audience is a byproduct of you being on that stage, where you're not looking to impress the audience, you are looking to express your thoughts. And when your thoughts formulate themselves into words and paragraphs, you will see the magic unveil.
Right. And I think it's a good idea and it's a good perspective to have where instead of trying to impress the audience, you're trying to express yourselves, your emotions, and how you feel about something that you're delivering on the stage. I think that's a good start to it. And let's move with the start. So now that you're on stage, there could be multiple ways of starting your speech. Now, of course, we are talking in general terms. We are not talking in specific cases. But what would be top three kinds of starts that Rupinder likes or Rupinder believes in?
A good question. Once again, most of my speeches would start with a question. And I would not say that those are top three. I wouldn't say that I've ever thought about top three. I would say that the top three safest ways to start a speech, generally speaking, whether you're a first time speaker or whether you're speaking for the 100th time. The first one, of course, would be to start with a question, which is the best way because it immediately demands some sort of a feedback from the audience. Now, you could ask a question
Mhm.
with the intent of receiving answers to it. For example, how many of you feel that tea is better than coffee? Show of hands. And you
Right.
expect people to respond. Or how
Right.
many of you feel that being an elder sibling is more of a curse than a blessing? Raise your hands and you wait for the people to respond. The other one is the rhetorical question where you're not really expecting people to respond, and you don't want them to respond. For example, a question like, do I look stupid to you? Or am I looking too fat? Or do you think I look prepared for this? You don't want the audience to answer.
Right.
For example, if I say, do you think I'm looking fat? And somebody said, oh, you had to get on the stage to say that. And that can unnerve you. What you
Right.
want is that perfect pause where that question registers in your audience's head. And just before they are able to respond, you respond yourself.
Okay.
So I don't know if you noticed it, but between asking that question and answering it, I uttered a phrase in my head, and possibly it came through my mouth. It was a silent phrase. I said, one Mississippi. So
Alright.
that is like 1 second.
Right.
It takes approximately 0.75 of a second for a synapse to form and translate itself into a thought inside to translate itself into a thought, at least in my case. And I may be of more limited mental faculties than the more intelligent audience out there, but the point is that 1 second is a ballpark. You delay it beyond 1 second, I have seen people start responding. You answer it before 1 second, it will not register with the audience. Also, it is a function of how many people are listening to you. 500 people, the pause will be a little bit longer.
Right.
2 people, the pause will be 1 second. So, but that is what my ballpark. So, starting with a question, including a rhetorical question.
Okay.
The second best way that I like to start with is by stating a startling fact. For example, we all know that Taj Mahal is the eighth wonder, is considered by many to be the eighth wonder of the world. But how many of you actually know that there were supposed to be two Taj Mahals?
Okay.
So the idea is that you transfer what you were thinking to the audience. Now the onus of thinking is on the audience.
Right.
The third, and it's my favorite actually, but it's not always possible. And please do not try it if you think it is not going to work out, is humor.
Okay.
Try having a humorous opening. Now, it is very difficult to achieve, but if you can achieve it, then trust me, there will be no better opening than that. So,
Okay.
for example, I went to a stand-up comedy trial. My friends told me, never, do not go on the stage. People will laugh at you. Really? The very reason that I am on stage right now is so that people laugh at me.
Yeah.
So
Right.
at that point, it registered very well with the audience. Right now, it might not.
Right.
So think of it along those lines. Ask a question, startling fact. If you are feeling adventurous, try humor.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. And if I have to take it forward, once when we are on the stage, there comes a time when we might start to feel that we are losing grasp on our audience, or probably murmurs have started in some corner of the audience, or possibly you are not able to get the concentration you want from the audience. At that point in time, what could be some ways or props that you would think of to bring the attention back to yourself as a speaker?
I've learned one principle that binds all every learning and development together, and that principle is called the ARCS, or the ARCS principle, Keller's ARCS model. You can look it up. It stands for attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. 4 words.
Okay.
Whatever speech you give, whatever story you tell, whatever presentation you do, it must first capture attention. It must then establish relevance. It should then build confidence so that the audience derives satisfaction. If your speech is not performing the way you want it to, then it is failing at one of these parameters. Either you were not able to get the attention, or you were not able to establish relevance, or you're not being able to build confidence, or the audience did not feel satisfied with your particular response.
Right.
That is one.
Mhm.
So I usually go with, when the audience seems disinterested, as to where is it? Are they not feeling confident enough? Should I provide more examples? If uh, they are listening, if was my opening not attention grabbing? Should I try another opening? Was I not, am I speaking on too controversial a topic so that people do not find it relevant? Or is the topic so mundane that nobody wants to talk about it? How can I make it interesting and relevant for them?
Right.
Last but not the least, towards the closing, is my audience looking convinced? If not, what additional argument can I provide so that it looks convincing to them? Now, it is technical in nature, but the thing is that once you get it right, you will know how to course correct while you are on stage. Now, that is with regards to the content, with regards to the narrative. Often it happens that things go wrong on the delivery side. Hand gestures are all over the place. You are not making eye contact, or you're making eye contact with one particular person in the crowd, and it happens. The rest of the audience is losing interest.
Right.
It's one of the reasons that I have seen that audiences lose interest is when people memorize speeches. And when they memorize speeches, what happens is that they start parroting off lines like anything, like a robot, an almost a monotone voice. And because that happens, people lose interest. That is one thing that you might want to look at when you are delivering. The third thing is the expressions, and that is something that I personally have not been able to master. I've often been told that I have a stoic face, or that I have a deadpan face. And sometimes, and the one of the feedback I got was, I wish I had no face. They wish I had no face. So that kind of a thing, a wooden face. The more expressive you are, the more effective your speech becomes.
Right.
One, and what we most often forget is that one of the expressions that is the easiest to bring into the into play is your smile. And if you play this interview back, you will realize that there have been moments when I've not been smiling, and I just got reminded that I have to smile. And the moment you start smiling and you are speaking, you will see confidence come in from all angles, and then you can move between your facial expressions, and it will enhance your speech even more. So, figure about content,
Mhm.
delivery, and experience. The
Okay.
other thing to remember is attention, relevance, confidence, satisfaction.
All right. So the Keller's arcs principle is what I'm definitely taking away from here. I'll just keep you hold on to this thought, and I want to talk about voice modulation, pacing of your speech, as part of keeping your audience's attention intact and interest so high enough that they listen to your message. Why don't you talk about some voice skills that we can practice, we can exercise so that we become better on stage?
There are vocal variety, of course, is a very important part of what of a speech. The mistake that most people most often make is they confuse vocal with verbal. They
Okay.
confuse the way a word is said with the language used when something is said. and they focus a lot on getting the language right, the syntax right.
Mhm.
What you want to do is get the context right in the first place.
Right.
How do you get your vocal variety right? There are various tips and techniques, of course. What I do is I use characters. So for an angry person, I've built a character.
Okay.
For a happy person, I've built a character and I've named those characters.
Right.
Okay. For a sad person, I have a character. For a surprised person, I have a character.
Right.
And when I'm delivering my speech, I realize the emotion and I simply slip into that character.
Okay.
It's quite like what comedians do. For example, Kapil Sharma has these two characters. One is Shamsher Singh, who is, you know, physically very strong, about 6 feet 4 inches tall, usually is found in Punjab police. Then there is this Lala, who is a timid personality.
Mhm.
And all he does is switch from being Kapil Sharma to Shamsher Singh or to that Lala personality. And each character brings with themselves their own peculiar voice, vocal uh, vocal capabilities or vocal talents, and you
Right.
bring them into play. Then you don't have to really focus on, oh, am I supposed to be angry here? Am I supposed to be sad here? You don't
Right.
have to make that decision on the stage. You simply have to slip into character.
Now, moving forward, there always is a talk about how do I structure my content. So when I talk about content, pinpointedly, I would like to ask you on researching for what you are going to deliver. How do you suggest what are your ways of researching things? And probably just for a context, let's say that you are wanting to deliver a story, but that is not your story. So how would you research on something like that?
Telling somebody else's story is not always an easy task. So, first of all, you need to understand to be a part of that story. When it comes to research, you want to do research so that you have at least three stories. And I'm assuming it's a 5 to 7 minute speech. I would say take 1.5 minutes for each story. So that add up to around 4.5 minutes. You need to have three solid stories or experiences. So maybe you or examples. So, and you can have an example, you can have an experience, you could have a story, and you try to tell them in your own way. Now, once you have those three examples or those stories or those experiences, you build your content around it because you have the main part, the body of your speech. Now, all that needs to be done is to attach a beginning and an ending to it.
Okay.
Okay. So, for when you research, come up with three stories.
Okay.
I'm saying minimum three because three is the magical number for human beings. We remember a Tom, Dick, and Harry,
All right.
right?
Right. Um, and whenever we're talking about content, one of the questions that is often in our heads is, which topic do I finally choose to speak upon? Because there could be multitudes of topics, even if there is one larger thing. So how can one funnel it down to a topic? What could be the approach for that?
Well, I'll give you a very simple way of selecting a topic. We often hear people speak and we judge. Are they doing it the right way? Are they not doing it the right way? And somewhere a thought forms inside our head, if I was on the stage, I would not have said it that way. I would have said it in this way.
Right.
The thing is that we never act upon that thought. But if we choose to act upon that thought, then we will have a speech topic ready for us. Usually, we think of a topic and then write a story.
Right.
The point is that experiences happen to us, stories happen to us. And when they happen, we do not give them topics. They're just incidents for us.
Right.
So all we need to do is figure out, okay, this is a this is an experience that happened with me. Why don't I give it a title?
Right. Right. I think that's a good way of looking at things because I think even personally, I would always think about what is my topic and then start to prepare on things. Whereas probably thinking about my content first as to what I am really interested in talking with my audience and then putting a topic to it is a good way of looking at things. Taking it forward, you mentioned some time back that a lot of times it happens that because we memorize the speech, we become monotonous, or we even lose the sense of how audience is responding to how we are speaking. Instead, we are only focused on delivering what we have memorized. The other way of it is to only remember the flow of things and let the course be. What how do you suggest a beginner in public speaking do things? Because after gaining a certain level of experience, probably people start to find their way. But if somebody is beginning into public speaking, what should be a good approach?
If you're starting, then obviously rote memorization would be the way to go,
Okay.
because what the idea is not to remember each and every speech. The idea is to understand that there is a structure to each speech. However, I also feel that memorizing a speech with the intent of getting it right on stage rarely works. Why does that happen? Because our brain is a very unique organ. It can be programmed any number of ways, but it follows a certain algorithm once it is on stage. Okay. When you've memorized something, you are there on the stage. You are focused on getting the delivery right. Now, understand you memorized under a certain set of conditions. It was a closed room. It was possibly you focusing only on the speech that you were going to deliver, or the poem that you were going to recite, or the song that you were going to sing. You did not have the context or the environment in mind. And now, when you get on stage, the environment can be very helpful, it could be very supportive, or the environment could be hostile. Suddenly, what has happened is that the context has changed, and your brain has now got to process this new information. Now, it can do only one thing at that point. It can either help you remember your speech, or it can process that information for you. And that is where you are going to experience a brain freeze. That is where you're going to forget what you had so carefully memorized. Even a small thing such as you speaking and a child deciding to get up and run off, not even onto the stage, but just run off inside the hall. The moment that distraction occurs is when you start forgetting your speech. Versus that, what you want to do is practice your speech, which means not just memorizing it, but also trying to enact it, also trying to imagine the audience that you're going to be speaking at. And usually you take a large audience into account, not a small one, because a larger audience turning out to be a smaller one, you can still manage. But a smaller audience turning out to be a larger one is something that you will not be able to manage. So that is one thing. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was living your speech on the stage. So if that child runs out and you see an opportunity for humor there, you crack a joke and you should still be able to return back to your speech
Okay.
without forgetting, without even registering that, okay, I had forgotten, or asking the audience, "Oh, where was I? Oh yeah, now I remember." Without that, you should be able to do that.
Right.
Hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. And I think if I understand you correctly, let me know if I've not understood you correctly. It's that probably when starting out, memorization can serve as a good idea because you are trying to get comfortable on stage, and because the environments can vary much more differently than you might expect, you might want to become a bit more flexible with how you structure your things, and also have the mindfulness to probably crack a joke or talk about that instance and be back on what your original intent was.
Yes. Albert Mehrabian is a famous psychologist. He's come out, he came out with this like decades ago. He said only 7% of what you are saying is verbal, 38% of it is vocal, and 55% of it is expressions or body language.
All right.
The unfortunate part is, Sayam, that we spend so much time getting the content right, crossing every T, dotting every I, that we don't realize that what we are trying to get right is only 7% of the speech.
And I think I'll take a cue from there. Of course, we have that questioning as well, but as you said, that 55% of what you're speaking is your body language, and that is where I want to take this conversation next.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we start by breaking various parts of body language? So my question is, body language could be about how you walk on stage. Body language could also be about how you're standing on stage.
Yes.
It could also be about how you are gazing your eyesight across your audience. So I want to know what all different variations could be to that body language, and then individually how we can work on it, and then we'll look at how all of them work together in tandem.
Get it. Let's break this down and let me make it in a manner that is simpler for us to understand.
Okay.
So, when it comes to stage management, what I do is that I divide my stage into 9 squares.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay, 3 by 3, nine squares. I start in the I start in the frontmost, closest to the audience, middle square.
Okay.
Now my squares are 3 steps to this side, 3 steps to this side, right? And then another 3 steps backwards, and then yet another 3 steps backward. Now, why do I do that? I might have 3 stories in which I'm going to utilize only a 2 by 3 matrix or a 2 by 3 grid. But if I have got more than one stories, or if stories have subplots in them,
Hmm.
then what I do is that I start with 2, move to my right, make a point, go back right to the back of the stage, tell a story there, use the intervening square as the place where the action happens, then return back to my story. Second story happens in the middle, right at the back. Again, intervening space between front and back, the middle one, the middlemost square is now being used for the narrative, where all the action takes place, where possibly you play out your characters, where possibly you have your dialogues and everything. And then I move to the right hand side. If you look at my world championship speech, you will see what I'm talking about. There are 3 stories. One is about when I was growing up. The other one was about my college, and the third one was about my work life.
Got it.
What I've done is that I've created a virtual timeline on the stage, and I
Hmm.
can actually refer to that. Okay, that is what happened when I was young. When I was young, and this is what is happening when I am in office.
Right.
But what you will also notice is that all of these 3 stories, they are happening at the backward part of the stage. I am actually going back to tell those stories. But when I come to deliver my message, I am more close to the audience than
Right.
I am at the back. The second thing is about eye contact. What I do is that I fix on one person on this side of the stage, one person on this side of the stage, and one person in the middle. But that is only for the front rows.
Okay.
Okay. Because there is no way that in a room full of more than 200 people, I will be able to make eye contact with the entire room.
Yes.
This is where I bring the camera into the picture. Because those people at the back will not be looking at me at the stage. They will be actually looking at the screens that have been put up for them.
Okay.
So every once in a while, I make eye contact with the camera as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So now I've got almost all of my audience covered. I've got this person in the audience to whom I'm looking, then this person to whom I'm looking. And within the first few seconds, there is this unwritten understanding between us that, look, I'm going to be looking at you, so you better be alert and listening to me. I'm going to be looking at you, so you better be alert and listening to me. And usually the person I pick is someone who is kind of important, because what happens is that they have a sense of a moral responsibility to be sitting up and listening to me, even though I might be delivering the most boring speech in the world.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So I pick those people in the audience. If I can help it, and if I've got supporters, I actually tell them to sit at different places so that I can actually make eye contact with them. And that helps a lot. But probably the most important thing that I have learned is that when you're in a big room and there are people who are looking at you, making an eye contact with the camera every now and then is very important.
There are situations when you are asked to speak where you were not particularly prepared for impromptu speaking. So what could be a thought process or an approach to giving or delivering a speech that is impromptu or you don't have much time to prepare your content on it specifically?
Very good question. There are two cases here. One, you know the content, you're familiar with the subject matter, and two, you're not familiar with the subject matter.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I'm going to say is that if you're not familiar with the subject matter, do not be a hero,
Right.
right? Do not try to come across as a subject matter expert on something that you're not an expert.
Right.
That is the first thing. Now let's consider the second case where you are somewhat of an expert or you are at least familiar with the topic.
Yeah.
For that, Sanyam, I will throw you a challenge.
Okay.
Give me any topic that comes to your head and let the audience know that we have not discussed any topics before that.
Okay. I'll have to think then.
Good.
Probably that is where I am now in a fix. Even when it started speech. Um well, so I have a picture of a God in my room and I want to ask, God is a reality or an illusion? Go ahead, Rupinder.
In my opinion, God is definitely a reality. And I say so because I was a person who did not believe in God always. Let me explain or let me tell you the story of how I came to believe in God. I have been brought up in a household where belief in God is an absolute prerequisite. My parents are very religious, as their parents and their brothers and sisters were before them, and we lived in a joint family. So these beliefs were handed down to us, they were kind of ingrained inside us. But being the rebel that I was, I always questioned the relevance, the existence of everything, and that included God. Anything that I could not see, I questioned the existence. And I have had my fair share of experiences that involve a stick, a slipper, or anything that I can be hit with. I will not go into those. Instead, I will go into how and why I came to believe in God. The first one was a book by Bill Bryson, A Short History of Nearly Everything, in which he starts with welcome. And he says that you are lucky to be here. And apparently, according to him, me and you sitting in this virtual medium talking to each other would not have been possible if the Big Bang was late by as much as one of a 500,000th of a billionth of a second. There is 1 in 500,000 billion chances that we are here. There are other almost infinite chances that would not have been here. Now, to achieve that kind of a possibility, you need a higher sentient being who ensured that everything happened at the right moment for you and I to exist. And when you factor in the various other things, that the wars that we have seen, the struggles that this planet has seen, and the diseases and everything, it is a miracle that we still exist. And when it comes to miracles, there is only one entity that can ensure that miracle. So that was my first reason, or why I chose to believe in God. The other one happened through a TV soap, Boston Legal, where the character Denny Crane is asked about the existence of God, and he said, and he is not the most moral of characters, by the way, or the most ethical, but he has a belief in God. And he says, I believe in God for a simple and a very practical reason. Let's say I believe in a God, turns out that God does not exist, no harm done, no foul. I simply believed in a thing that did not exist. But if I choose not to believe in a God and it turns out that God does exist, boy, I am in a world of trouble because he created that world for me in the first place. So to summarize, the reason I chose to believe in God was one, that cosmic impossibility of my otherwise existence. The other one, and the fact that believing in God is a very safe option. You start with your opinion, you state the reason for your opinion. Then I need to substantiate my reason with examples or experiences or both. So in the first one, I gave examples about God's existence, the infinitesimal possibility of our existing, and then the other example about why it makes sense to believe in God. What I did was that I substantiated my reason with examples. And then I concluded by summarizing and restating the opinion that I had in the beginning. So opinion, reason, example, opinion. OREO, Oreo approach. That is the best way to remember.
Yeah.
Whether it is an impromptu speech or whether it is a prepared speech,
Right.
you can always employ the Oreo method. Now, what I will suggest to everyone who's listening is that wake up every morning, decide on a topic, build an Oreo around it.
Yeah.
I have practiced Oreo so much that I can literally do it in my sleep, which is why I asked you, throw me a topic and I will build an impromptu speech around it.
Right. And I think the confidence has come with practice, and it's not
Yes.
it's not just a bluff. It's because of the practice that it has developed, and I think
It is very
right.
much. It is very much.
And as you talked about practice, I think one of the most important question everybody would have is, okay, Rupinder, you have told me what all I can do, what all I should think of, and how I should do it. But where do I do it is a question, because I cannot suddenly be out of nowhere, be a keynote speaker in a big conference. So talk about a few platforms where our listeners, can engage themselves and learn the art of it, because I think it's not an inborn thing, but it can be learned, but it is also an art, so it needs practice to do it better.
I think you answered the question. It is a skill. And as with every skill, a skill can be learned. Public speaking is a skill, and skill can definitely be learned.
Yes.
The best platform that I can tell you when it comes to public speaking is Toastmasters.
Right.
I am a Toastmaster since 5 years, and I will say that I am a proud Toastmaster.
Yeah.
Okay. And you get immense possibilities to speak. So if you're questioning as to where do I find a platform to speak, I would say go to toastmasters.org, find a club that is near you. This year, Toastmasters International has mandated that all meetings can be online if you want. So a lot of the clubs are holding their meetings online.
Yeah.
So feel free to reach out to any Toastmasters club around you. But if you're a person who feels intimidated by that kind of an environment, then the next best thing for you would be YouTube, your own YouTube channel, wherein you start practicing, uploading your videos, then seeing how people respond, and then try to build your public speaking skills.
Right.
There is also Model United Nations, which is another platform where you can practice your public speaking skills. But nothing beats Toastmasters. Nobody is doing what Toastmasters is doing, and for good reason. Toastmasters has been around for almost uh, 100 years.
Right. And I think it's very important that we realize that getting that platform is a blessing in itself. And if not blessing, is an opportunity in itself. I think blessing might not be the right word, but opportunity in itself. So
Yes.
before we close, Rupinder, uh, you have given us a lot of techniques as to how one can think about it, what kind of perspectives can be built, what kind of mental models which we can surround ourselves with to deliver it effectively. What would be one thing you want to share with the listeners about public speaking? Anything that you want, but one thing that you want to leave the audience with.
I will say one thing that the world needs storytellers. I often say that. And I say that because in the last 5 years, I have learnt the art of the narrative, the art of the rhetoric, and I'm still learning. And I believe that a lot of problems exist in this world because the stories around them were not told properly.
Mm.
Consider climate change, for example. We all know that it is hazardous, it is a real problem, yet we never think twice before getting into a car and driving to a place, even if that means that we'll be burning a lot of fuel, which will be spoiling our environment, not to mention the sound pollution, the risk of accidents, the overall presence of the vehicle on the road because the vehicle needs a special kind of a road. So we are taking away the earth's natural resources to build that road for them just so that we can drive conveniently. And that is because people told stories about cars. But very few stories have been built around the bicycle. And because no one has told a story like that, bicycles are not encouraged. In fact, bicycles are more celebrated. And that is what I mean when I say that the world needs storytellers.
I think that's a very good note to bring our conversation to an end. If you want to reach out to Rupinder, what we'll do is we'll plug his website's information into our description box. Also, the speech that he delivered at the World Championship of Public Speaking, we'll try and put that into the description box as well. Here is one thing before we close. Public speaking can be daunting at first. It can be intimidating when you start. But once you get into the groove, you have the possibility of making enormous change. Thank you for listening to us. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Like, share, and subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for latest updates.